There we go. For a minute, I didn't think that we were going to go live. We were just going to stay in the nebulous world of almost live, but we are live now. This is the Women in Business podcast. It is Wednesday, October 14th. And I said October. I've been saying September for like weeks now. I don't know what my deal is. Anyway, hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. Cindy King, you're not late. Thank you for joining us. As always, I appreciate it so much. And I wanted to get started right away because I have a lot to talk about with our guest. And the guest today is Banholzer, who is originally from Redmond, Washington. She earned both a BA and MA in criminal justice from Washington State University and began her early career at the Spokane Police Department as a criminologist. Ooh, I didn't know that. That's interesting. In 1996, Allie met a dashing Air Force pilot, Dave. They married, and Allie soon found herself moving around the world to support Dave's Air Force career. Along the way, they had two beautiful daughters, Kate and Caroline. Allie began Wear Your Spirit Warehouse, her current business, in 2004, literally at her kitchen table. She was a mom of two beautiful baby girls and a proud military wife to her husband, David. In 2010, the business grew out of the house and moved into a commercial space, and Allie continued to support her young family and hold down the home front while David traveled and did all that being an Air Force officer entails. Early in 2014, David became the 14th presidential pilot of the United States. That's a really cool title. And commander of Air Force One, fulfilling a lifelong dream. Sadly, this dream was cut short in May of 2014 when David was diagnosed with terminal cancer. At the time, Allie closed down her commercial storefront and moved Wear Your Spirit Warehouse back to the house so she could care for David and her girls. With the help of incredible friends and employees, Allie was able to continue to run Wear Your Spirit Warehouse while caring for her husband. David passed in November of 2016. Allie took a bit of time to care for her girls, grieve, and plan, and in April of 2017, she moved Wear Your Spirit Warehouse back out into a small commercial location in Huntingtown. With the amazing support of friends, employees, and local community, Allie was able to grow Wear Your Spirit Warehouse into the company it is today with a new, larger location. So that's like right there, a whole lot to talk about. So let's bring Allie in. Hi, Allie. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Man, that whole bio, there's like 4 million things I want to talk about here. But I want to start. Okay, I want to start with something that isn't in the bio because it's something that just happened recently, which is you were one of the winners of the first ever Women in Screen Printing Awards. And that to me, now I want to read a little bit about this for people who don't know. Let's see. This recognition is received by 6 female leaders who have advanced the screen printing industry through their innovation, vision in spearheading successful businesses, and philanthropy, all serving in influential positions such as owner, founder, or CEO. These women are impacting our field as a whole, as well as the communities they serve. They demonstrate leadership, progressive responsibility, and community awareness. Now, one of the things that I was not aware of about this is that you all were nominated. You had to be nominated by someone to be considered for this award.
Yes, and
which is amazing.
Yeah, my understanding, it was a fairly lengthy process to nominate. They wanted to know quite a bit of information. And so it was.
Yeah, from what I was reading, it looks like they took nominations and then there was like a 15-person committee or something that voted on who won. And it was you and 5 other women. And I mean, all like leaders in your field, which is amazing. But I have to ask, because this is something that always I'm always curious about, which is how did you get into screen printing? Why screen printing? What attracted you, or why was that what you chose?
I'm afraid I don't have a great answer. I fell into it, honestly.
Okay, fair enough.
So the original iteration of my business, I was in the scrapbooking industry. I was developing products for that industry, and then I would license it to people who would manufacture it. That industry really took a hit in 2007, 2008 with the recession. 2 things happened. 1, the recession, people didn't have discretionary money to spend on the hobby. And 2, at that point, a lot of it went virtual, like Shutterfly and things that way. It went digital. And so I decided it was time to to get out of that industry. At that time, I had basically the equivalent of a commercial cricket on steroids. If you're in the industry, I had a graph tech.
Okay.
That, vinyl cutter. And so I was cutting signs and banners, and it was a election year. So I was doing political signs, you name it, whatever I could do for my hustle. And I walked into a sporting goods store, and there was a huge banner up, and I asked the owner, I said, how much did you pay for that banner? He said, $500. I said, call me next time, I'll do it for $250. And I gave him my card. And the next day he called me and said, I don't really need a banner, but I need somebody to do custom screen printing for me. Can you do custom screen printing? And I said, sure, I can do that for you.
Did you know anything about it?
Nothing, zero about it. And so in a process of about 2 weeks, I bought equipment. I went out and took a 2-day training. I got myself educated, and I started printing. Wow. And the first job I printed was a disaster. I imagine. It was on polyester, and I had no idea you had to use special ink. Oh, boy. But then, from there, I learned one of the things about me personally is I am a perpetual learner. I'm always seeking out education, both industry and business. And so it didn't intimidate me to go and learn this process and then learn how to grow it and learn where else besides the sporting goods store could use me. And that's literally how I fell into it. And then with the screen printing, somebody came along and said, well, do you do embroidery? And I said, of course I do. And I bought an embroidery machine. Of course I do. Sure. Give me 5 minutes and I'll be able to do it. It's kind of a running joke in the business. I say yes before I know how. And admittedly, it has gotten me into trouble a couple times. But I say yes a lot, and then I figure it out. So you never went the route of, if you read the advice in a lot of the groups and stuff, they'll say, oh, you start out with transfers, or you find somebody to contract it out to, or you just went, okay, I'm in. And yeah. And I'll figure it out. You kind of jumped and then figured out how to build your airplane on the way down. Yeah, exactly. Well, now, it seems to have worked. It did work. If somebody came to me now, I would have much different advice. The equipment I bought was not, it was kind of an all-in-one, here's a package, give us your money, here's your package. Now that I know what I know, I should have done more research on equipment. I should have, taken a little more time. Right. Not tried to build my airplane out of aluminum cans, but actually out of, something that will fly. Something that would fly. Okay, well, that makes sense. But I find it interesting that you just went, yeah, I could totally do it. And then, which almost kind of has to be the way you do it in a lot of instances. You can't wait to have all your ducks in a row and then go, oh, yes, now I can do it. Because by then the business is already, 5 miles down the road somewhere with somebody else. But yeah, exactly. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead. No, go ahead. I was going to say, I was working with Marshall Atkinson on an article he's writing that's coming out in a publication soon. And I was listening to a TED Talk, and it talked about women in business and why not as many women choose to be entrepreneurs and the hesitation and what holds them back. And one of the things is the psychology and the way we're brought up. And women are typically brought up to, if you're out on the playground and you're doing the monkey bars, the boys are told, go for it. Can you swing from one arm? Can you skip a bar? Things that way. Girls get up there and they're told, be careful, don't fall, don't hurt yourself. Sure. And it sets us up from a very young age to be very cautious, which is not a bad thing. But I grew up in a household where we bred and trained horses, and I barrel raced. And the very first job I had was as a camp cook in a gold mine for a summer. And so what I will fully admit, it has gotten me into trouble. Sometimes I jump and I'll lose money, or I need to slow down. But I was not raised with that be careful, be cautious vibe from my parents. And so I really do sometimes jump in with both feet. Most times I jump in with both feet and say, we'll figure this out. We can do it. Well, I also have to wonder too, because as your bio said, you were also married to someone in the military. And I think I was not in a military family, but I have military people in my family. And
you learn a degree of independence, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
Being a military spouse, because your spouse isn't there.
Yes. Yeah.
So you have, go ahead.
And you learn to go with the flow and be able to pick up. So as a pilots are required to have 12 hours of crew rest. So at any time, before they can fly. So at any time, the Air Force could call my husband and say, you're leaving in 12 hours. And he could be gone for an indefinite length of time. And so we had to structure our lives that way. We had to be able to, I had to be able to manage the house 100% by myself without him, with 2 kids, manage their schedules, get them to whatever sporting events they had and things that way. Of course, he was a very involved father. He was absolutely there and very involved. And when he was home, he was 100% hands-on. But yeah, military spouses definitely have to be very independent, be very flexible. I know people who have had orders to move. They're literally driving from one side of the country to the other. They're halfway across the country, and the military calls them up and says, yeah, we know you just bought that house out in California, but we're moving you to Oklahoma now.
Oh, wow.
And literally mid-move, your location changes.
But that's part of the deal, though. You kind of know that when you're part of a military family, that this is how things work. But I mean, that the sacrifice and the stress that must go with that sometimes is just. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and I told you this before we started doing the broadcast, is I was doing some research before we started. One of the things I didn't know is how supportive the military is of military spouses starting businesses.
Yeah, so I think there's a little misnomer there. There are lots of resources that you can go out and read and research and things that way. The military itself, as the formal U.S. military, if you go into the JAGs, which are the attorneys, and you say, I want to start a business, they will hand you a packet on how to form a sole proprietorship or an LLC or a corporation. But then you're on your own. You cannot actually use them to be your lawyer to set it up. They are only available for active duty. So they have those resources. However, out of the need for military spouses to have careers that are very mobile, so depending on your spouse's career field, and men and women, there are military spouses, men and women. Sure. So depending on your spouse's career field, depends on how often you move. So we moved 7 times in 11 years in the beginning of his career.
That's a lot.
So we rarely hit 2 years on station anywhere. At one point, we did 3 cross-country moves in 22 months. And so to run a business, I could never run the business I have now doing that. No. It just would be physically impossible. And so out of that need, then what also happens if you're trying to go and get hired somewhere, you have a resume where it looks like you can't hold a job for more than 9 months to a year.
Right.
Because by the time you get there, you get your house settled, you start looking for a job, you get the job, you may be 9 months into that move already. And now you're there for another 12 to 15 months. And then generally you'll know a little bit ahead of time that you're going to move, and doing cross-country moves with kids and families, you might quit your job a month or so early. So anyways, to organize and plan and do that. So, if you're in a big national corporation, you might be able to transfer and things that way, but it's difficult. So a lot of military spouses go that way of being an independent entrepreneur. And then they start to look for those types of careers that meet their skill set and can move. And that's why when I first started my business and I was in that scrapbooking, I didn't manufacture myself. I created products and licensed them to manufacturers because I couldn't. I just couldn't move the equipment.
Well, yeah. I mean, the creation part of it is portable. You can take that wherever you go.
Exactly. And my customer base is portable.
Right.
So there are a lot of organizations that give resources and then support military spouse entrepreneurs, but they're not necessarily the formal military. They're not the U.S. government military. So one association that I'm involved in is the Association of Military Spouse Entrepreneurs.
Cool.
Yeah, and it's available to active, retired. I'm a Gold Star widow. My husband died on active duty, so it's available to me as well. They have a lot of resources. It's very collaborative, so people share and support. Lots of resources. You know, if I need a virtual assistant, that's where I'm going first. One, I want to support that military connection that I have. But two, I know the people have been vetted. I know who they are. I can access them easily.
Sure.
Things that way. They recently put out a publication in conjunction with USAA, which is a big international really corporation, and did a guide to military spouse entrepreneurship. And it was available both digitally and in print with Stars and Stripes magazine. And they featured 12 military spouses, but then they also just all of the resources. This is where you go. This is how you can get funding. This is how you set it up. And it's actually a really good resource for anybody that wants to start a business, but particularly those military spouses.
That's very cool. Well, I think this, for some reason, when I was doing the research, I was surprised by this, which when I thought about it, I was like, oh, this totally makes sense, because if you're a military spouse, as you were saying, you probably aren't going to stay in the same place for a long time, and you need to have something you can do that you could take with you. And and you also need the flexibility of being your own boss. And so it totally made sense to me when I thought about it, but I didn't. So I'm kind of excited to get to ask you about this, because it wasn't something that had occurred to me.
Yeah.
So the military itself is more in the sense of a resource provider. Because I noticed they seem to have like websites where you could go and learn about the various aspects of starting a business. But I mean, for the actual doing of it, you're going to need to go to whoever you would go to if you were non-military.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
That makes sense. That totally makes sense.
And then depending on what you're doing, there are, just like being a woman, you can be certified as a woman-owned business. You can be certified as a military-owned business. Now, I can't be certified as a military-owned business. My husband was never an owner in my business. Okay. And so, and it does have to be the actual member. But a lot of the spouses can co-own the business with their husband or have them on it and be both certified women-owned and military-owned.
Oh, wow. That's cool. I was not aware of that. Okay. Yeah. So there are military families where the person that's in the military also participates in the business too. So, which, I mean, again, makes sense, because you also have to look at, even if you're career military, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I think it's like 20 years or something is considered career.
Yes.
Okay. So, 20 years, I mean, if you join the military at 21, you're only 41 when you're done. So you've still got a whole lot of see, this is interesting to me, because you don't think about it until you happen to come across it. And then you're like, oh, well, this is, it totally makes sense. And I applaud the military for helping people, at least providing resources and encouraging this, because that's a tough, what you pointed out, which is another thing that I really hadn't thought about, which is when you're a military spouse, you're moving all the time. So if you are trying to work in the traditional business world, like you said, you have a resume that looks like you have ADD to the, nth degree, and you can't build up time anywhere, because the military could say you're off to your next posting. And
and I'm a prime example. I worked as a criminologist. That's what I did. I was interviewing to be an analyst for the FBI. And when I met my husband, with the FBI, you have to have a master's degree and at least 2 years work experience. So I was getting my work experience. I was young. I was 26 years old. I met him, and I could pick a career. I could choose love. I chose love. I think I chose well. But that's not a job that would have moved with the military. I had to give up that path. And I found that I really found that out. I thought I would still be able to be a criminologist and just work for local police departments. But after our first move, we moved to Belleville, Illinois, which is O'Fallon, Illinois, is where Scott Air Force Base is. It's right across the river from St. Louis. No cities around there are large enough to need a criminologist except for St. Louis. St. Louis has a ordinance on their books that to work for the municipality, you have to live within the city limits. Well, my husband is an Air Force officer, and the job he was in had to live within so many miles of the Air Force base. And there were no exceptions. So,
yeah. So you kind of, it's just how it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And he doesn't have a choice. I mean, he was in, he ended up being career at that point. So pilots have a commitment of 8 years once they graduate pilot training. And so he had to serve 8 years. And that's where he was at that point. Yeah. He did end up serving 24 years, but
that's just really, wow. Well, it's really just, I mean, everything you're telling me, and I knew this because, like I said, I had relatives in the Navy and in the military, and not the Navy's not the military, but you don't really realize how much of a sacrifice it is. I mean, it's an honor to serve your country, but you also really are making a sacrifice to do it. And that's, wow, that kind of just strikes me when you talk to somebody who's actually doing it. It's like, that's a big commitment that you're making. And then, I mean,
yeah,
you could spend a whole show just talking about the fact that your husband piloted Air Force One, which is just like so cool.
But we could, and every podcast I do, there's a little segment that always goes there. It's okay.
Well, really what I want to talk about is one of the things that I have noticed just from knowing you and you know, seeing the post you put up is that you brought a lot of stuff. How do I want to say this the right way? A lot of the way that you operate seems to be influenced a little bit by the experiences that he had or you had as a military family. And one of the things that I remember specifically is you were talking once about a challenge coin of his that you had. You talked about it on a, yes, there you go. And
I just pulled it out of my pocket.
And I have to confess, I'm not really familiar. A challenge coin is what? I mean, what is the significance of it?
So there are a couple different types of challenge coins. Every unit in the military has a challenge coin, and it's literally a heavy brass coin. Do I have something for comparison? You can see size-wise, like here's a pen.
It's fairly big.
It's good size. And generally, the higher rank you are, the bigger they get.
Okay.
I'm not sure we go there, but but so challenge coins generally, it's not a membership coin, but if you're in a unit, you have your challenge coin. It's an identity. It brings camaraderie and things that way. Mm-hmm. Commanders, as they command units, will have their personal challenge coins. And those they can give out to high performers, people who have gone above and beyond. It's a recognition. Okay. And then, you know, a lot of people will choose to carry that coin. A lot of people collect coins. They see how many they can get and things that way. There's kind of a tradition in the military that if you're in a bar and you have a challenge coin and you throw your coin down, if there are other military people there and they don't have one in their pocket, whoever doesn't have one has to buy the next round. Okay. If you throw it down and everybody has one, then you have to buy the next round because you put the challenge out and everybody met it. So my husband was the commander of Air Force One. He was President Obama's pilot. And then he also commanded a unit of about 350 people that were flyers and maintainers and cops and flight attendants and security and all of that. So he had his own command coin. Okay. So I'll try not to ramble on too long, but there's a couple of things in Air Force One. Everything is executed with the utmost precision. It is 100% non-fail mission. It is an Air Force mission. It is not political. It does not matter who is in office. The planes are owned by the Air Force and the personnel are owned by the Air Force. So it's non-political. Mm-hmm. But as an example, a chalk time is the time that the wheels on the airplane stop in their parking space. So, you know, kind of like an on-time arrival in the commercial airline industry. They have chalk time windows of plus or minus 30 seconds.
Whoa, so it's that, wow.
It's that narrow. It's that tight. It's that narrow. And outside of safety reasons, of course, if weather is bad or there's safety issues,
Sure.
this kind of goes out the window. But outside of safety windows, if you are commanding the airplane and you land outside of that plus or minus 30 seconds, you can be relieved of command.
Wow.
And so it's a game they play. And this could be you're flying from Europe to Andrews Air Force Base, Maryland.
Sure.
And you're gonna make that time within plus or minus 30 seconds. So that's an example of the level of detail they go to and the precision that they have. My husband was often quoted as saying, perfection is the minimum. Everything above that is presidential. And so,
well, okay.
So I fall short of perfect every single minute of every single day.
As we all do.
Yes, and that's okay. And I also do believe in business there is a good enough. I always strive to do better. I always strive to improve every day, but we're not all going to be perfect all the time. So I have grace for that as well. So I don't want to sound like I'm holier than thou, but I carry his challenge coin in my pocket every day as a reminder to strive for that perfection.
Wow. Now there's something that you said in this little bit that just kind of blew me away. 350 people. Are they all, just because I'm curious, they're all connected to Air Force One?
Yep.
So if you're the guy that's driving the plane, you're also commanding all the people that are making the plane go and the mechanics.
Yes.
And wow.
Yes.
See,
so
so
there's maintainers, there's military structure. So they are a group. If anybody's listening that understands military structure, there's a group. Within that group, they have 2 squadrons. Groups fall under a wing. So there's the wing, then there's the group, and then there's, in his group, there were 2 squadrons. So he was the group commander. There's a squadron of maintainers. They're the ones that maintain the airplane. And then there's a squadron of flyers. And the flyers are flight attendants, flight engineers, flying crew chiefs. They call them Ravens. They're security police cops that guard the airplane. Communications, they're the ones that make sure the president can call from the airplane to the ground and everybody can make phone calls. And then, of course, the pilots. There's only actually about 7 pilots out of those 350. And then, but the maintainers, so the Air Force One is the flying White House. It is definitely our greatest home field advantage when the president is out and about and overseas. And so there is great pride in it. That airplane is hand waxed before every mission.
Oh, wow.
And to give you perspective,
insane.
From nose to tail, it is longer than the White House. And it is about 6 stories tall.
That's a serious wax job.
Yeah.
Whew. And I thought waxing my car was horrible. I can't imagine.
Right. And when you come into the unit as a maintainer, that's your first job.
Well, that would make sense because that would be a way to really develop pride in what you're doing and also a sense of detail, I would assume.
And some humility. I will sit here and brag on everybody that's in that unit all day long. But they're all very humble people.
Sure.
So you clearly, to get hired into that position, have been at the top of your career field.
I would think.
You may be an avionics electronics specialist and at the top of your career field, and you join it and you're not touching the avionics. You're going to go wax the plane.
Sure. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah. And that's tradition dating way far back. That's not something my husband did. That's just,
that's how it works. But what strikes me as interesting about this is that, and this just makes me curious because, okay, so your husband was managing this huge group of people and he has obviously a military structure behind him and everything. But did you learn, because you had an insight into this, some techniques or things from how the military operates that you took to running your business when you had employees?
Some. But the military structure is so different,
I mean, the military has a different ethos, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, he can walk into an office and give an order and say he needs to report by the end of the day, and it's going to happen. That's the way the military works.
That's how it works.
I can walk into an office and give an order and say I need a report by the end of the day, and it might happen that day, but I might not have the employee tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, so there's some balance there. The military is not for profit. That was one of the biggest things my husband and I would always debate about with the business, is where I was spending the money and how I was doing it. And he graduated from college and he went through ROTC on a full ride scholarship through the University of Wisconsin, and then immediately entered the Air Force. He never a day in his life ran or was in a managerial position in a business, in a for-profit business. And so that was always one of our biggest debates. You know, did he have budgets he had to manage? Yes. Were they huge budgets? Yes. But they have these pots of money, and you have so much money for gas, and you have so much money to maintain your buildings and things this way. But the budget's laid out. Congress approves it. That's what you have. That's what you live by. And so there's no sales hustle. There's no marketing. There's no, you know. And so, so I think I learned more about the differences than I did. I certainly learned leadership skills. I certainly observed him. He was a very loved leader. And so, and one of the biggest things he did was he always took care of his people, whether they had family issues or medical issues or things that way. He always took care of his people. And that was one of the biggest lessons I learned from him.
Well, I think that's what you said is really interesting, though, is because you see a lot of kind of how to articles or books, and they're like, do it like the military does it, run your business like, and you know, you very accurately pointed out that the military is a different structure than, you know, non-military. And I think that's a really good point, is the way that the military gets a lot of stuff done is because of the tradition and the inherent structure of what they're doing. And it doesn't always translate, which is a very good point. So I really like that. And I want to throw out a comment here because I think this is, Rena said, amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing. So I thought that was nice. So I want to move on. It is. And I want to move on because there are so many parts of your story that are, I think, resonate with a lot of people. But one of them has to be, you lost your spouse. And I mean, when I was reading your bio and you said you were running your business and taking care of him, and I have dealt with family members who had cancer and lost family members to cancer. That's a full-time job, just caretaking somebody. And then you had children who were younger and you had to make sure they were all right. And then how are you not just like in a corner somewhere holding your knees and rocking? I mean, how is this? How?
Tenacity. You know, I'm sure we've all seen those shirts floating around Pinterest and things that way that say, you know, underestimate me. That'll be fun.
Yeah, I want one of those, actually.
There you go. So I had an amazing support structure around me. I can't take credit for it all. I had an amazing support structure. Like I said, he was a very loved commander. The medical piece of it, I am not naive, and I am not, I've lost the word for it, but I recognize I was very lucky. I was very lucky with the medical structure of the military. That's not always the case in the military. I was the first to admit that I had some advantages because of his rank. He was a colonel, and because of his job. We had direct access to the White House, and the White House has direct command over Walter Reed Medical Center. So
that helped.
That helped. I'm not going to deny it, and I'm not going to pretend that there are other spouses whose husbands have died of cancer that had a much more difficult road, and I'm thankful and blessed. Sure. I took advantage of every advantage I could. I was trying to save my husband.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
I can't blame you there.
Yeah. And then beyond that, I had amazing friends and support in our community that helped me. His story goes a little bit, I've described it as living in a snow globe. We really were living that perfect idyllic life. Everything was picture perfect. I had 2 beautiful girls. He had his dream job. I was running my business. We were happy. And literally one Saturday morning, he dropped of a grand mal seizure in front of all of us.
Oh, wow.
And 2 days later, he had 9 hours of brain surgery, and I was told he had 14 months to live. So it was like somebody picked up that snow globe and shook it really hard.
Yeah.
And set it back down. And all of the pieces were still there. every piece of our life was still there. I still had my business. He was still in command. I still had two beautiful children, but nothing landed where it was before. And it was no longer pretty. And that's the best way I can describe the experience.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
And so at that point, I was out in commercial space. I shut down my commercial space. I didn't close the business, but I shut down the commercial space. I had 2 employees that I trusted to bring into my home. And it wasn't that I didn't trust people in my home. It was who was going to honor his story, who was going to keep our confidence of what he was going through and things that way. And with those 2 employees, we simply maintained the business. And the business was much, much smaller at that point. So we could. I got rid of my printing equipment. I brought home the embroidery machine and we moved to transfers, just like you brought up. Most people start with transfers. So I went to transfers and started doing everything by transfers and online stores. And I maintained a customer base that I could manage and that were fine with me working out of my home. And if we needed to meet, we'd go meet at Starbucks or the library or something that way. He had his 9 hours of brain surgery and then was in remission, so he had glioblastoma, which is what Senator McCain passed from. It's what Joe Biden's son passed from, Ted Kennedy. And so nearly everybody, the stereotypical process of glioblastoma is you have that initial episode, you're diagnosed. It's kind of a ticking time bomb in your head. You don't even know it's there. Then it explodes one day. That was his seizure. He had surgery to remove as much of it as possible. He did radiation and chemo. But for 15 months, he was perfectly fine. He stayed in command. He no longer physically flew the airplane because he had a seizure. So he couldn't be at the controls of the airplane. But he was actually, he was still on the trips as the mission commander, commanding the mission. And so for 15 months, he was in the state of remission, which was longer than they told us he had to live. So he did some clinical trials and all of that. And he was very healthy. He was 44 years old when he was diagnosed. He was very young and fit. He ran 3 miles every day. He had radiation. And if you know anybody that's gone through radiation after 6 weeks of radiation, they're usually just flat out. So he stayed in command and did all of that. In August of 2015, he had recurrence. And so the crux of, and even then it was slow. He had another surgery in September of 2015 and another surgery in November of 2015. And it really was those last 12 months that he required a lot of care. And I had that support. And so he ultimately lived 28 months with the disease. He passed in November of 2016. And so in the last 4 months, he was in hospice. He was in hospice at our home. But I just had incredible support. That was a really long answer to your question.
Well, no, because I mean, I think there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, like I said, having done that, and in my case, it was my mother, so it wasn't someone I was married to, but having done that caretaking for someone who's ill, that's a huge toll on you, just as, emotionally, physically. You don't sleep, you don't eat, you're stressed, all that stuff. And I'm just trying to imagine that also dealing with kids who need support and comfort because their daddy's sick, and then trying to run a business too. And I think you made a really good point that the employees that you brought into your home, that's also a huge thing, because everybody that's in your space when you're trying to deal with this stuff, they have to be the right people, or it's just another thing you have to take care of.
Right.
So,
and they had to give me a lot of grace, because there were times we had jobs due and Dave would be a priority. And I'm like, I'm sorry, figure it out. And that's not the way to run a business, but that was the caliber of people I had to support me, which was amazing. I was very lucky.
It sounds like it. So so you had this infrastructure in place, and I mean, that's a grace for you, and that's I'm not going to say a happy thing, but that's at least made things maybe a little easier than
manageable.
they would otherwise have been. Manageable, yes, thank you. That was the word I was looking for. But then, I mean, sadly, the cancer wins, which don't even get me started on how much cancer sucks. But yeah. So then you're left with these two girls and a business and yourself. And that's another thing that I find, I don't want to say interesting because that's not the right word, but how people how people pull themselves back together after that. I watched my stepfather when my mom died, and it's I can't speak to that because I've never had that kind of relationship. But did you go to support groups? Did you concentrate on your business? Did you how did you do that? I know I'm asking a lot of how questions.
No, that's great. I love sharing the story. I love talking about Dave. So they say, it's a short little tangent. They say people die twice. First time is their physical death. The last time is the last time their name is spoken. And so I want to speak his name every day.
Sure.
And so you can ask me all the questions you want. So we had, Dave was always a planner, always investing in things that way.
Sure.
I will be honest and say I was fortunate that when he passed, I could have closed everything up and stayed at home and raised my girls and been okay.
Okay.
Financially.
Sure.
Mentally, I would have gone down a rabbit hole I would never have recovered from. I needed something
Fair enough
to occupy my mind and give me a reason to get out of bed every day.
Sure.
I'm not excited. It's really easy to put people on a pedestal when they have died because at that point, the memories are they could do no wrong.
Mm-hmm.
He was a typical husband. He was a typical man. He could be I'll call him a turkey bird so that you can keep this PG.
Right.
But we had the fairy tale romance. We had the fairy tale marriage. We didn't fight. We didn't strive. So I looked at what am I going to do to make sure I get out of my bed every day and that I'm available for my kids and available for my friends.
Sure.
And I could have either gone back into criminology or I could continue with my business. In criminology, I worked robbery, homicide, and sex crimes. That's dark. It's dark. So dark. I was already in a dark enough place. I didn't think that was a good place for me to go.
Mm-mm.
So I chose to continue my business. And then I took some time to decide what that was going to look like. My daughters were middle school and high school at that time, sophomore in high school and seventh grader in middle school. And so what did I want that to look like? Did I want to go back out in a commercial space? What would my hours look like? How much time would it take?
Mm-hmm.
But also, what example was I going to set for them? And that was a big one for me. Was I going to set the example of being a strong, independent woman, which I had always been in our marriage and in raising them with his career? Or were they going to watch me crumble? Not to say I didn't have moments that I crumbled. Lots of tears, lots of moments I'm not proud of, but I decided that I was going to be the strong, independent woman I had always been, and that needed to look like continuing my business. And so about 6 months after he passed, we moved back out into commercial space. At that time, we kept printing by transfers, and we had one head of embroidery, sublimation, and the vinyl cutter in about 1,200 square feet. Within a year, we outgrew that. And now, almost 4 years later, we have an auto, which we just installed. We have 8 heads of embroidery. We still do sublimation. We do laser etching and cutting, wide format printing, and we still have the vinyl cutter.
So you've got a little bit of everything.
A little bit. I really prefer to keep things in-house that I can and produce in-house.
Oh, I understand that. Yeah, there's a quality control thing that happens when you're doing it yourself, definitely.
Yeah.
So I want to talk too, because you're providing me with all sorts of opportunities, because I haven't had a guest that's had your particular situation before. But one of the things that I always like to talk about, because it's an issue that's important to me, is you're raising 2 young women. And one of the things that is one of my pet platforms, I guess, is how do we get more women to start businesses, to speak out, to talk about the issues that affect women and all that kind of stuff. And I feel like one of the ways to do that is to kind of bring up younger women to expect that that's what happens, as opposed to, like you said, if you're on the monkey bars, be careful, don't bruise your arm, because, you know, that's, be careful, be cautious, don't do anything that's too out there. So I have to ask, what, and I don't even know what the question is that I want to ask. I'm trying to formulate it in my head, but how do you think your daughter's upbringing, leaving apart their father having cancer and all that, but how do you think, what message do you think they've gotten versus the message that maybe you got when you were a kid? Are they hearing different things, I guess? And not just necessarily from you, but in general?
Yeah, I don't know that they're hearing a lot of different things. My mom also worked outside of the home and owned her own business.
Okay.
So I don't know that it's different from what I was raised with, but maybe compared to some friends or things that way. A couple things. I see a maturity in my girls. I see normal, typical teenage girls. We have all the same issues.
Sure.
We butt heads. They make stupid decisions. They fall down. That's normal for teenagers. That's what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, that's a rite of passage.
But I also see a maturity in them that I don't see in other teenagers. And maybe maturity isn't the right word. Perspective is the right word. Okay. Having lost their father at the age that they were when they lost their father means a lot of the trivial stuff that goes on in high school and college rolls off their shoulders. They're like, and some of the things their friends are all up in arms about, they're like, really? This is what you're upset about? This is nothing. Like, I've survived much worse. Let's move on.
Right.
So they have a mature perspective. I did raise them also with go for it. My youngest daughter's a competitive gymnast. She's
that's a tough
field. Yeah. So she's in the USA Junior Olympic program, which sounds bigger than it is. It's not. It's just it's a competitive program. She's not an elite gymnast. She's not going to the Olympics. But she's a level 8 gymnast. That program is levels 1 through 10.
Okay.
Level 10 is collegiate level gymnastics. Those are level 10 gymnasts. So she's a level 8. She does gymnastics 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, and her gym's an hour away. So it's a 6-hour round trip for her as she juggles school. She's taking 5 AP classes.
Wow.
And she's a 4.0 student. So she's her father. She's not me. She's her father through and through. Although Dave wasn't an athlete, he got cut from his high school golf team. So I was the athlete. He was the brainiac. And so she got the best of both worlds.
There you go.
But I push her in gymnastics, not from a competition perspective, not you have to beat everybody and things that way. I push her to break her own limits when she is afraid of doing something on beam, or she's holding back doing a certain tumbling pass. I will challenge her to break through those barriers specifically, or find a workaround. And an example is there's a move in gymnastics called a cast handstand. It's where you swing under the bar and then come up into a handstand, and then you go into a giant, which is where you're at full arm length going around and around. She can do giants all day long. For some reason, she struggles with that darn cast handstand. And I pushed to try to help her break through the mental. It was all mental, break through the mental of that. And we couldn't get it. I'm like, okay, so it's a level of skill you have to do in your routine. So what's another skill at that level you could do instead? What's the workaround? And so I do try to challenge them and push them to break through barriers that are either physical or mental. Not in a competition way. I'm not that mom on the sideline saying, you've got to do, I'm not that, I don't know what the right term is, but.
You're not a dance mom.
I'm not a dance mom. Yeah. But I do try to support them to break through the mental barriers and those physical barriers. And then if they really can't, then it's like, well, what's the solution? I've come up with, sorry, there's a fly buzzing around my head. I've come up against barriers in my business or personally that I haven't been able to break through. So let's get creative and find an alternative to that barrier, because there's more than one way to do this.
Sure.
And the traditional way isn't always the only way or the right way. That's how we have breakthroughs. So that's kind of the approach. That's kind of the approach I take to try to help them be independent and break through. And then also, I was not the mom saying, "Be careful."
Go for it. You make a really good point in what you said, that once you go through something as life-changing as losing a parent, probably growing up in a military family had something to do also with teaching them to be a bit more self-reliant and able to adapt to things and all that kind of stuff. But it ends up, and that's something I still am trying to parse out for myself is, I don't have children, but I have a niece and a couple of nephews, and you try to figure out what to tell these people, these young people, especially girls, because there still aren't as many role models as I would like there to be sometimes for strong women who are really trying to accomplish something. And that's nothing against the women who are making a living by, being pretty, or if that's their thing and it works, fine. But, that's a question I keep asking, is how do we start younger women thinking about what they're going to be as a full-rounded person, as opposed to just, I want to get married, or, when I was growing up, and I suspect I'm probably older than you, but, it was like, my mom was a nurse and she worked outside the home, but you could be a nurse. My grandmother was a teacher. And those were kind of like, there was nobody saying you can run a business.
Right.
There was nobody saying you can take your idea and go out and, because I, from a very young age, did want to run a business, and everybody was going, "Oh, that's cute." And I was like, "Yeah, it's not cute.
It's what I want to do."
Yeah, it's what I want to do. But, and I will say, from the standpoint of, because I, from a very young age, always thought I was going to be a writer. Mm-hmm. And I heard writers don't make any money. You're going to starve. And I was like, I don't care. It's what I want to do. I'm going to figure out a way to do it, which I did. But the number of people who will tell a young girl when she expresses a wish or a desire that maybe isn't fitting within the social construct, the number of people that'll go, "Oh, that's never going to happen." Ugh.
Right. So I really try. So one of the things I like to do in my business is hire high school students and then put them in areas in the business that have a higher level of responsibility than they would normally have in a high school job. So I have no problem hiring high school students and training them on how to set up a job on the press register, get it all set up, and print it. My high schoolers are doing that. They're running the embroidery machine. They're, and it's an investment because I know I'm not going to keep them. I know I'm putting all this training into them, and they're likely going off to college.
Sure.
But it gives them a confidence, and it gives them a broadening that gives them a step up from some of their peers who might be flipping burgers or doing something that way. And in doing that, I'm trying to show them that, kind of the same way with my girls, there's lots of ways to approach it. If you run up against a roadblock one way, here's another way. So if you want to be a writer, that's great, but research it, and what's the plan? What's your end goal for that? Because at some point you do have to be a contributing member of society, and you do have to make enough wages to support yourself in whatever manner that's going to be.
You do?
And right. And you got to pay your bills, and in most cases you got to pay your taxes. So that's great, whatever you want to do. Show me how you're going to do it. I'm not going to tell you can't. Show me how.
Right. Well, and that's the thing, is I think that a lot of people tend to just go right to, they skip the show me how portion and they go right to, oh, well, that's not going to work.
Right.
You know, and that was always really frustrating to me because I could think of like, I mean, the way that I ended up becoming a writer was not really the way that I ever thought I would, but it happened. And so, but the number of people that said, oh, well, it won't. And I was just like, what, you know, and I know that, Alan, I like this. You are both great biz and life examples to women and men. Well, thank you, Alan. We appreciate that. That's very sweet.
Yes, Alan is awesome.
Yes, Alan is a sweetheart, definitely.
Yes.
Alan and Marshall are both great supporters of women. So, and I really hate to say it, but we're almost at our hours.
So I'm going to give you a succinct little blurb, I guess, that will succinctly say what I was trying to say. So I am in the process of becoming Lean Six Sigma certified. And one of the methods in there when you are analyzing data and processes is to ask why until you can't answer that question anymore. Kind of like little kids are great at it. Why? Okay, so we're going to do this. Why? We're going to do this. Why? We're going to do this. Why? I take that and flip it to how. So if you come to me as a young high school student and say, I want to be a writer, I'm going to say how. How, until you can't answer it anymore. Or I've totally exhausted you. You know, instead of
rather be a fry cook.
Well, or you know, you just get to that point where, okay, I'm going to be a writer. Well, how? What are you going to do? Are you going to go to college? Are you going to get an English degree?
Right.
You know, okay. And then how are you going to support yourself? I'm not going to tell you you can't. I will never tell you you can't. I'm going to ask you how you're going to do it, and I'm going to make you think about it.
That totally makes sense. And I wish more people would take that path, especially with younger people, because it's too easy to say, well, that's never going to work, or that's not practical, or that's, you know, and I find, which I think is sad, but I find there are a lot of grown-ups. And I mean, I understand fully that I am now in that category, but well,
I refuse to grow up.
Chronologically anyway. But there are a lot of grown-ups who maybe didn't accomplish the dream that they wanted to accomplish. And so they tend to not maybe knowingly, but they tend to kind of rain on other people's dreams because they didn't get to be where they wanted to be, which I think is sad. But anyway, my little segue. But I do want to, before we go, I wanted to put up a couple of, if you want to read about the Screen Printing Awards, this is the URL for that, and then this is the URL for Allie's business, Wear Your Spirit Warehouse, and you can also find them on Facebook. So I wanted to make sure that I got those up at least once. And let's see. Oh, here's an interesting comment I want to put up before we go. I was talking to a customer. He has a daughter that is graduating soon. He said she will go to college to have a career. She may never use it, but if she were to lose a husband, she has a backup. And I'm like, okay, thank you. We're in the 1950s now.
Right. Let's go for the MRS degree.
Well, and I, you know, there's nothing wrong with the idea of thinking you're going to get married, you're going to have, but I mean, you know, we're both examples of maybe that doesn't always happen. I never met a particular man, and thank heavens I didn't marry some of the guys that I could have. Ooh. And then, you know, you did get married and had a lovely life, and then something, you know, a rotten disease showed up and changed the story. And so you have to be cognizant of that. And you have, I mean, that's, I think, one of the, and I fully realize I'm speaking as someone who hasn't been married, but that's one of the big myths, I think, of marriage, is that you get married and then everything just is perfect forever.
Yeah, and I am of the mindset, if you want to work, if you want to stay home and raise kids, stay home and raise kids. If you want to do some hybrid of the two, that's great. Just follow your heart and do what you want to do.
Well, yeah, and whatever you do, you know, give it your all, and accept that it's the choice that you made for you, and don't listen to the other people. One of the things I've never understood is the number of people who feel like they have a right to have a say in what somebody else does when they have, it's, the number of people that have said to me over the years, well, you should have done this, and I'm like, but you don't even have anything to do with this. Has nothing to do with you.
If it's moral,
so I don't understand that.
Yeah, if it's moral, ethical, legal, and it doesn't hurt anybody, and it's what I want to do, get out of my way.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, and it makes me sad because it took me a while to learn that. I had to get a little older before I realized that. When I was younger, I was very concerned about what everybody thought about everything. And then
it took me losing my husband to not worry about judgment.
Yeah. And I think honestly, kind of a similar thing with me, where I got to the point where I dealt with some rough stuff in my life, some of which I'll be talking about next show. And once you get on the other side of it, it's like you said with your girls. Once you come through a traumatic event, you're like, well, this doesn't matter. Okay, Jean Fitzsimmons asked, could you repeat the Armed Forces Entrepreneur Program? What's the name of the group that you were on?
Yep, it is the Association of Military Spouse Entrepreneurs.
Okay, and if you send me a link, if you'll email me a link to that, I will put it up on the Women in Business Facebook page.
I will do that, but I'll also just say it's very simple. It's amse.co.
Oh, okay, there you go, amse.co. Okay, so that's the answer to that, Jean, and we are now slightly on bonus time, so I'm going to say thank you so much, Ellie. This was amazing, and you educated me on a number of issues, and I'm going to pop you out and say goodbye, and thank you.
Well, really, thank you for having me. The hour flew by. I had a great time. Thank you.
It's fun. I love that. All right. Thanks. Well, that was amazing, amazing, amazing. I learned so much, and we could have talked for a lot longer, but you know how that goes. Then it's like bonus time, and we've gone for like 2 hours. Next week is our first issue show, and we're going to be talking about sexual abuse and sexual harassment. I will say up front, this is not going to be a show that you're going to want anyone who is a child or someone younger to maybe be around for, because we're going to talk about some tough stuff. I'm going to be joined by Jillian Allen because she and I both have experience and stories in this area, and we're going to talk about a lot of different aspects. So I hope you'll join us for that. I hope we can have some good discussion. I'm also going to be putting up on the Women in Business Facebook page, which you can find here, a request for people to share their stories on this topic. So if you have a story you'd like to share, I would love you to do that. Thank you all for being here. This was amazing. I learned so much. I hope you did too. And I will talk to you all next Wednesday.